later, Tim.
Perfect.
I started the webinar.
Okay. And at 10, we can start letting people in.
And
It looks like we have a hand up here. So it looks like we have some attendees. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to HCD's office hours for today. And my name is Anthony Zepeda. I will be today's monitor. We're going to hold for just a minute for more of our colleagues to join us for today's session. In the meantime, I want to invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and the region you represent. We will begin soon. And thank you for those who are typing your name and the region you represent in the chat. Welcome. We're just waiting another minute to let everyone get in so we can get started. We'll give it about one more minute. Okay, I think we are ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG. And today's a special office hours. We've allotted 2 hours. We may go that long, but we may not. And the subject of today is the 2024 ESG state guidelines. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for the public record. And if you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. Next slide, please. Okay, here's how to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the question box. That's a little icon, Q&A icon that's down below in your ribbon and in the screen that you're viewing. And when you do have a question in the Q&A box, please type your organization and your question in the question box. The team will read the questions out loud at the end of the presentations, and we will do our best to provide answers throughout the presentation in the chat or out loud, time permitting. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, representatives, and specialists who can help answer questions during the Q&A session. And I want to reiterate, please put your questions in the Q&A box. Sometimes folks will throw them into the chat, but the chat can quickly move and we lose the question and we have a hard time tracking them. And we want to ensure that we answer all of your questions today to the best of our ability. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. Next slide, please. Please note that both the slides and the recording will be sent to all participants within 2 weeks of today's session. The holidays may add an extra week there, but you'll get it in approximately 2 to 3 weeks. And we'll always have it available on the ESG website as well. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, that includes the following. We'll do some welcome introductions. Next, we'll provide some very brief ESG updates, followed by today's spotlight session, a very detailed deep dive review of the 2024 ESG guidelines. We'll follow that up with a Q&A session. And next slide, please. So here are your ESG team representatives. We're the staff that work directly with you to administer your grants. We've got Sam, Giovanni, and myself. If you ever have trouble reaching us, you can always email the ESG NOFA inbox at the address at the bottom of this slide. And that is monitored Monday through Friday during normal business hours. So if you're having trouble reaching someone, that's another good avenue for reaching out, as someone will always be monitoring that during the week, during business hours. And next slide, please. So here's our schedule for the next upcoming office hours dates. The next two office hours, December 25th through January 1st, there are no office hours. Obvious, we have the holidays. Most of us will not be in the office those days. And we'll be returning in approximately a month for on January 15th for standard office hours, where we will go over the 2024 NOFA resolution and the requirements. We'll come back on the 22nd, a week later, instead of a 2-week, for a special office hour session where we're going to go over the 2024 NOFA. Next slide, please. And speaking of that NOFA, here is the schedule for our 2024 NOFA. This is a tentative schedule. We're going to do our best to stick to it, but there could be a few changes here and there. But overall, we're going to release the NOFA on December 31st. The application portal will open approximately a month later. On March 28th, the applications will be due in eCivis, and we anticipate making award announcements in June of 2025. Next slide, please. Okay, here's 2 quick slides on 2022 and 2023 grants. Just some quick updates. We've said these before, but at the same time, this might be new information. We want to make sure we share this with you. So RFF deadline was on the 2nd. If you haven't already submitted that, make sure you get your last RFF in today or tomorrow at the latest, and then your certificate of completion in the eCivis. If you've already had your RFF submitted and approved, make sure that you have your certificate of completion emailed to your HCD representative or the ESG NOFA inbox. And then closeout reports will be done at a later date. Your rep will notify you when those are due. Next slide, please. For the 2023 grant updates, I think all but 3 or 4 of the contracts have been awarded and finalized and approved in eCivis. If you need to make changes to your budget or goals or update something in there, please reach out to your rep first, as eCivis can be a little touchy when we go in and touch the goals or change the goals, and requires a lot of support to fix that. So please reach out to your rep first, and we will help you update your goals and any other things you might need to change. And you can also add new users in eCivis if you have already had your contract finalized. Once again, just reach out to us. We can help you with that. Send you an email, walk you through it, send you instructions. Pretty straightforward. And we want to make sure that all of your folks are set up adequately on eCivis. And next slide, please. And we'll hold there just to see if there are any questions that came in on the updates or overall. Amanda?
We have 2 questions, one from Christina. Can you please reshare the slide with the NOFA deadlines? If you don't mind flashing that back up, Anthony or Chelsea. So you can take a screenshot or whatever you need to do of that for now.
Yeah, and we will have this up every office hours from pretty much here through March.
And then another question came in from Gina. Can we close out even if the final check hasn't been sent?
Yes, it's been approved, right, Amanda?
Yes, Gina, I'm not sure if you're intending that as for HCD or for sending it out to one of your subrecipients. If you can unmute yourself and just clarify, that would be great.
So, hi, this is Gina. Hi. So, my last RFF is approved. However, the check hasn't been released, and so I was waiting for the check to be released in case there was some type of issues before I closed out.
As long as the money has been spent, it should be fine, because we need that final RFF and everything. So just submit it, and hopefully that check goes through, but I doubt you would have any issues, right?
No, I'm talking about the check from state, like from you
Right.
guys
Oh,
to us. We have not received our money from
oh,
you, so I don't want to
yeah.
close out until I get my money.
So you can submit the certificate of completion, but we are not closing out the file in eCivis yet. But yes, if there's any issues with the check, we will get that handled even if you have submitted the certificate of completion. There's no issue with that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. And then Bernadette asked that we reshare the slide with the webinar schedule. Chelsea, please. There you go. So again, you can screenshot that slide for now if you'd like. Okay, and that's it for now, Anthony.
Oh, fantastic. And so, Chelsea, if you can go to the questions slide. And then the next slide should be the titles. There we go. Okay, and now I'll take it from here again. Thank you for your questions. Good to know. We'll make sure to go a little bit slower on that information next time and make sure those slides stay up a little bit longer. And now we move to today's Spotlight series, the 2024 ESG State Guidelines. You may recall that last month we provided a general overview of the 2024 ESG guidelines and how they'll impact the 2024 NOFA and subsequent funding cycles. That was a broad overview. Today, our purpose is to take a deeper dive into guidelines to provide our grantees and partner agencies with an in-depth discussion of the guidelines and answer any questions you may have related to the guidelines. Next slide, please. So before we dive right into it, just a quick overview. You know, the ESG program, most of you know this, is a federal program administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. The program is governed by federal regulations outlined in the federal CFRs. HCD is the state recipient of the ESG funds from HUD. And so in addition to the federal regulations that govern this grant, ESG has also been governed by California state regulations. Next slide, please. But the state portion is changing. HCD received authorization from the state legislature to move from California state regs to the ESG state guidelines. Moving forward now to the 2024 NOFA and subsequent NOFAs in the years ahead, the ESG program will be no longer governed by the state regs. They are replaced by these guidelines. We'll still have the federal regulations and the federal grant requirements, but the guidelines will be the go-to for California regulations. The guidelines have gone through an extensive public outreach process and were formally approved by our governing agency earlier this month. Next slide, please. So why is HCD moving to guidelines? What was the impetus for doing this? We wanted to speed up the deployment of funds to our subrecipients. We wanted to give our grantees as much time as they could possibly get under our agreement with HUD to deploy these funds in their communities and address the issues that are facing their communities. We are going to be changing the funding where it's based on a formula allocation, and also the trend in all federal grants, it's going to be based more on performance outcomes. So we want to provide that maximum flexibility. And we also want to reduce the administrative burden on subrecipients in HCD. It can be a detailed process each year with a NOFA, all of the requirements for the NOFA, all of the paperwork and application. With the guidelines, we just do the NOFA every 3 years, and we do amendments each year, which are much simpler than going through the whole standard agreement process. Next slide, please. So that's the general overview, why we're switching to guidelines. And now we're just going to dive right in, line by line of the guidelines. And so for the first portion of this guidelines presentation, I'm going to turn it over to HCD specialist Amanda Lockwood, who will be providing an overview of Articles 1, Sections 100 through 104 of the guidelines. Take it away, Amanda.
Good morning. If you'd like to follow along, as Anthony just mentioned, I'm going to go through the first section, specifically part 100. So the ESG guidelines were adopted with the purpose to administer ESG funds, establish procedures for the state of California administration, and establish policies and procedures for use of these funds to meet the purposes contained in the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. The guidelines are also intended to be updated as necessary to address changes in state and federal statutes and federal regulations regarding the ESG program. Next slide, please. In the event of a conflict between the state ESG guidelines, 2 CFR Part 200, or the federal ESG regulations, the federal regulations shall prevail. Next slide, please. The next section, or Part 102, are the definitions. As you can see on this slide, several definitions in the ESG guidelines have been added and or changed from the ESG state regulations. Some include the annual action plan, board of directors, contractor, project description, and written standards. We will go into some of these definitions further into the presentation, such as Build America, Buy America, or BABA, since they are brand new topics. Next slide, please. As you can see on this slide, several more definitions that were in the ESG state regulations have been removed from the ESG guidelines. Some include the administrative entity, balance of state allocation, rate, ranking, and subrecipient of the administrative entity. We will go into the reason some of these definitions have been removed later in the presentation. Next slide, please. The next section, or Part 103, is the program and administrative requirements. All department program administrators, applicants, and contractors must adhere to everything listed on this slide, such as the federal statutes and regulations, cost principles, audit requirements for federal awards, and all state and federal non-discrimination and fair housing requirements. Next slide, please. Additionally, department program administrators, applicants, and contractors must adhere to everything listed on this slide, such as the federal regulations, award letters, standard agreements, and these state guidelines. Next slide, please. Next, I will go over section 104, non-discrimination. The department prohibits discrimination on the basis of such things as age, citizenship, color, disability, ethnicity, gender, marital status, race, religion, or veteran status, and all other classes of individuals protected from discrimination under federal or state fair housing laws. Individuals must not be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity funded in whole or in part with ESG funds made available pursuant to these guidelines. Next slide, please. All contractors and subrecipients shall comply with the requirements contained in everything listed on this slide, such as the American Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Amendments Act, and the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. Now I'll pass it off to Tuesday Cool, who will go over Build America, Buy America provisions.
Thank you, Amanda. The Build America, Buy America Act will come into play with the emergency shelter grants, especially in emergency shelter minor repairs. Every product used, every nail, screw, or toilet flange used in even minor repairs needs to be made in America, and proof of origins needs to be provided. For example, if your program replaces a window. All the tools and resources involved must be made in America and certification provided. HUD is still developing BABA guidance. Because of the stringent requirements, HCD is highly encouraging your group to look to other funding for minor emergency shelter repairs at this time. Next slide. Going forward, your ESG application will require acknowledgement of BABA requirements, and each request for funds will ask if your emergency shelter repairs if there were any emergency shelter repairs purchased made, and you'll need to check a box saying yes or no. If you plan on using ESG funds for minor repairs for emergency shelter, contact your representative for guidance, and we'll help you through the process. Thank you. Now to Sam to discuss eligible components.
Thank you, Tuesday. Hi, everyone. Now let's get started with eligible components and activities. There are no changes to eligible components. There's still street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, HMIS, and grant admin. Components like rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention have maximums and minimums. More info will be in the annual action plan and NOFA. Maintenance is an eligible activity for emergency shelter so long as it doesn't extend its useful life or adapt it for new uses. But please consider what Tuesday had said in the last slides. And of course, HUD, habitability, and housing standards still apply under these guidelines. Next slide, please. Moving on to eligible applicants. Each continuum of care is allowed up to 2 eligible applicants per funding year. The selected applicants must be in good standing with HCD, meaning they've submitted a single audit to the Secretary of State's office and have their most recent 990 form with the IRS. Selected applicants may not be approved by HCD, and in that case, a denial in writing will be issued within 30 business days. Next slide, please. Now for the NOFA. NOFAs will be issued every 3rd year, which means applicants will only need to submit an application every 3 years. Funding in between NOFAs will be added by amending the standard agreement. This cuts down on administrative costs and time so that these funds can be used in a timely manner. Details like the amount of funds, time frame for submissions, performance outcomes, and much more will be in the NOFA. Next slide, please. Moving on to special disaster or emergency supplemental assistance NOFAs. If a state of war, state of emergency, or a local emergency is declared by the appropriate office, these guidelines may be suspended and a special NOFA issued in order to address the emergency. Next slide, please. Now for the contents of the application. All applications must be submitted through eCivis. No changes there. As for threshold, resolutions must be in the HCD approved template. Concurrent resolutions are accepted as long as the authorized resolution is in the HCD approved template. For contracts involving cities, either the mayor or mayor pro temp must sign the standard agreement, unless there is an ordinance in place for delegation of signatory duties. All applicants, if they are required to have a single audit, must submit their most recent single audit, and if there are findings, a remediation plan must be included. Next slide, please. All right, more threshold items. We require 100% of the ESG funds to be matched with either public or private sources. For nonprofits, we need their current bylaws and articles of incorporation. For emergency shelter applications, we need documentation for site control. For nonprofits submitting an emergency shelter application, we'll need a certification of local approval signed by the local government. If a local government is submitting an application, they will need to complete the NEPA requirements. For nonprofits, HCD will complete the NEPA requirements. Next slide, please. Now for the evaluation criteria. Applications will be scored on the criteria set forth in the annual action plan. For applications in an over-the-counter NOFA, they will be funded on a first-come, first-served basis. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to award of funds. Once the standard agreement is executed, you'll have 120 days to submit the first request for funds. Then RFFs must be submitted at least every 3 months. Organizations that do not fully expand their award will not be allowed to apply for future funding for the next 2 annual funding cycles. The continuum of care may select another applicant. Now handing it off to Giovanni.
Thank you, Sam. We will begin on Article 2, Sections 208 to 212, and Article 3, Sections 300 to 303. Next slide, please. Indirect costs. Please follow the ESG federal regulations that are relative to your awarded budgets. Funds may be utilized to pay indirect costs. They may also be allocated to the eligible activity if it is consistent with the federal regulations. Eligible activities with indirect costs need to be added to direct costs when determining the total costs. These are also subject to expenditure limits. Next slide, please. Now we have match. HCD requires each ESG subrecipient to provide match equal to 100% of the ESG funds that HCD awards. An important thing to remember, match documentation must be maintained. Match costs paid by program income will count toward matching requirements. These costs must be eligible, reasonable, and supplement the ESG program. Eligible sources of match include the following: federal funds, local state government funds, and private donations of cash, property, volunteering, and labor. With labor, this will need to meet a special criteria. Next slide, please. Wrapping up on match. Match commitments are required to be provided by grantees as part of the grant execution process. These commitments may not be conditioned on anything except the availability of ESG funds. Please remember, match spending is required to be documented internally. Next slide, please. Now we move on to the match exemption competition. HCD is offering a competitive match exemption award up to $100,000. Prospective applicants will be scored as noted in the NOPA. Applicants interested in applying for the match exemption must submit the request and required documentation at the time of their application via Unisolutions, previously known as eCivis. Each match exemption competition will be identified in the annual action plan, the AAP, and/or NOFA for each funding year. Next slide, please. We're on administrative cost limitations. For administrative cost limitations, a portion of the grant award may be spent on administrative activities by the grantees as outlined in the ESG federal regulations. Next slide, please. Moving on to advance payments. An operating advance of $5,000 or 30 days working capital, whichever is greater, can be requested by grantees. This request must be received within 60 days when the standard agreement is executed or allowed by California legislation. A completed ESG RFF must be submitted to receive the operating advance or payment for work performed. Items eligible for reimbursement must be reasonable and meet the requirements as outlined in these guidelines. The department may authorize these payments in agreement with specific state codes. Next slide, please. Now we focus on the grant administration portion with standard agreements. Grantees will enter a written contract with HCD for a multiple year term. This is called the standard agreement. An estimated amount of funding will be calculated from the annual funding cycle received from HUD during the multi-year term. All active standard agreements will be amended by applying the formula allocation listed in these guidelines. The estimated award amount will be updated every time HCD receives funding from HUD during the annual funding cycle. Next slide, please. Continuing with standard agreements, during non-NOFA years, HCD will inform grantees with active contracts about the following: their allocation amount, budget revisions, signed certifications from the grantee regarding any changes, issuing award letters, and amending standard agreements to reflect adjusted funding. Upon request from the department, grantees will need to provide a current authorized resolution with the amended funding listed. The standard agreement requires grantees to follow ESG federal and state regulations. Next slide, please. And finally, to wrap up on standard agreements. The standard agreements include the following: award amount with budget details, an itemized list of eligible expenses, the payment process to be reimbursed, statement of activities and services provided by the grantee, and timeframes of when funds shall be spent. Changes to the standard agreement will only be approved by HCD if the grantee requests line item changes to the budget and the budget revisions are greater than 25%. Please remember, budget revisions greater than 25% will trigger an amendment change to the standard agreement. Please follow the ESG federal regulations in relation to financial reporting and fiscal management. Next slide, please. Now we will discuss procurement of equipment, goods, and services. HCD and grantees are subject to applicable federal and state requirements when acquiring equipment as listed in the established ESG guidelines. Grantees must provide HCD evidence of compliance with federal and state requirements before any reimbursement of purchasing equipment, goods, and services is submitted. Next slide, please. Now we're focusing on program income. The definition of program income is the same under federal regulations and includes any amount of a security or utility deposit returned to the grantee. To prevent an accumulation of program income, it is strongly recommended by the department that grantees already have their policies and procedures in place. HCD must approve the expenditure of program income prior to being spent, and it must be expended within the contract year. Next slide, please. Continuing with program income, the grantee's matching requirements can be met by costs paid by program income, and only if the costs are eligible and supplement the ESG program. Program income must be tracked as required by the ESG federal regulations, and it must be tracked separately to show that program income was spent correctly by grantees. Next slide, please. Now we'll discuss the financial and performance reporting requirements. Record keeping and reporting requirements must be followed by grantees as listed in the ESG federal regulations. A financial management system that is compliant with ESG federal regulations must be in place, as well as the policies and procedures. Audits from private nonprofit organizations must be submitted to HCD for review and approval. These audits must comply with all applicable federal laws. Next slide, please. Wrapping up on financial reporting requirements, a grantee or a grantee subrecipient may be audited by request from HCD periodically. This audit will be at the expense of the grantee. Inability to comply with the request within 90 days will result in ineligibility for future funding. Evidence of the completed audit, along with unresolved findings, will be required by HCD from applicants who are applying for ESG funds. And finally, annual performance reports, APRs, not submitted by grantees will not be able to receive funding for the next 2 funding cycles. That finishes this portion of the guidelines. I will hand it off now to our ESG program manager, Tim Coop-Whitley. Go ahead, Tim.
All right, thank you, Gio. Our next section will cover the financial and performance reporting. Contractors must follow the record keeping and reporting requirements identified in the CFR listed on this slide. The contractor must have policies and procedures and a financial management system that complies with the requirements of this regulation, in addition to the financial requirements required by the CFR. And as specified in the CFR, HCD requires all applicants for ESG funding to provide evidence that a single audit has been performed. The audits must comply with all applicable federal laws, including Code of Federal Regulations, and audits must be submitted within 90 days of the HCD request. Annual performance reporting, contractors must submit annual APRs in order to maintain eligible for future ESG funding. As a reminder from the previous slide, APRs not received by the due date will not receive funding into the next 2 annual funding cycles. Next slide, please. As the state recipient for California's ESG funds, HCD is required by law to monitor the performance of its contractors. We use HUD's monitoring risk assessment tool to identify potential high-risk grantees. Monitoring is generally conducted on an annual basis. However, HCD has also implemented a mini monitoring process where we request backup documentation on every request for funds received. The intent is to catch problems while they are still small, so we can work with our partner agencies to take care of any minor issues before they turn into a potential bigger problem. And in the event that there are any issues identified in the monitoring process, HCD will work with their contractors to develop performance improvement plans if necessary. One last reminder that just as HCD is required to monitor its recipients, contractors are required to monitor their service providers to ensure they are in compliance with federal regulations and the 2024 ESG guidelines. Next slide. Grant payment requirements. After your standard agreement has been executed, the first request for funds, also known as the RFF, must be submitted to HCD within 120 days of the execution date. We highly encourage you to submit your request for funds on a monthly basis. RFFs are processed on a sequential basis, so if a contractor submits 5 requests for funds on the same day and there's a problem with your first FF, this can cause the remaining 4 RFFs to be put on hold until the problem with the first RFF is resolved. So please submit an RFF every month as possible. On that note, the guidelines state that contractors must submit at least 1 RFF every quarter. If this requirement is not met, HC reserves the right to develop a remediation plan for the contractor to ensure timely expenditure of ESG funds. As directly related to the last point, contractors are required to meet the expenditure milestones identified in each standard agreement. If the contractor cannot meet the expenditure milestones, it could result in HCD disencumbering the funds. It could also lead to disqualification from future ESG funding cycles. Next slide. For contractors that wish to make changes to their standard agreement, contractors can request budget line item changes to their approved budgets. If the line item changes represent less than 25% of the award budget, your HCD rep can process a budget revision. If the line item changes represent more than 25% of the awarded budget, a budget amendment will be required. A budget amendment will take more time than a budget revision. Contractors must notify HCD if they intend to change their service provider, and in addition, the contractor must provide HCD with a new signed service provider agreement, as well as evidence that the service provider is not debarred, and the contractor must verify that the service provider has policies and procedures in place that meet all ESG federal requirements and meet the requirements of the ESG state guidelines. Next slide. Closeout procedures. The grant closeout procedures do include the following. Contractor must submit their final RFF, detailed expense report, and certificate of completion within 30 days after the expenditure deadline identified in the standard agreement. And the contractor must submit all financial, performance, and other required reports within 60 days after the expenditure deadline. In addition, the contractor is required to refund any balance of unobligated funds advanced to the contractor that are not authorized to be retained by the contractor. The contractor must account for any property acquired in whole or part with ESG grant funds in accordance with sections 302, 309, and 310 of these guidelines. Next slide, please. Record retention requirements. As mentioned in the previous slide, federal regulation and these ESG state guidelines require contractors to maintain all fiscal and program records pertaining to the ESG grant for a period of 5 years after HCD closes the grant with HUD. So in general, HCD and HUD will monitor grantees anywhere from 1 to 5 years after the grant expiration date. So please make sure to keep those client files and any supporting documentation for up to those 5 years. The contractor must maintain accounting books and fiscal records in compliance with the federal general accepted accounting procedures. In addition, HUD, HCD, California State Audits, and the California Department of General Services shall have the right to review and copy any records and supporting documentation pertaining to the performance of this agreement. Contractors must also maintain accounting and fiscal records related to this grant for those 5 years. Next slide. Insurance coverage. These requirements, there are no new updates in terms of the of the insurance requirements, contractors are required to obtain and retain insurance coverage on real and personal property. This is a standard requirement on all federal grants and is outlined in the CFR listed Part 310. Next slide. Contractors are required to annually update HCD on all real or personal property acquired under the ESG standard agreement. And before disposing of any real and or personal property acquired under this grant, the contractor must receive written approval from HCD and HUD. Once approval is received, the contractor must contact HCD for disposition instructions pursuant to the requirements of the CFR Part 11 through 16. And that concludes this section of the guidelines, and I will now hand it back to Anthony, who will be presenting the next section of our guidelines.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everyone. Just before I get started, a quick reminder to everyone. If you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A box. And if you're not familiar with that, if you look at your screen where you're viewing this PowerPoint, if you hold your mouse down below, there's a ribbon and it says Q&A. And right now there are 10 questions in there. Just press on that button, type in your name, the region you represent, and type in your question. And we will get to it to the best of our ability today. We still got plenty of time for Q&A. Once they go into the chat, we lose them because it just keeps scrolling, and we want to make sure we capture them in the Q&A. It also captures them for us afterwards, so we have them right there. And with that, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. So in this section of the guidelines, we're going to go over terminology that should be familiar to those of you who have already received federal funding or have worked with federal government on grants in the past. In this section, it's a lot of standard boilerplate language or federal language without a lot of updates. So I'll probably go through it pretty quickly, but if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Once again, this section, federal regulations that govern all the contracts using federal funding, and ESG is federal funding. So for example, debarment and suspension. These are just tools used by the federal government to protect against fraud, waste, and abuse by non-responsible contractors. A suspended or debarred contractor will not be able to conduct business with the federal government or federal funds like ESG. And overall, the Office of Budget Management, we can give you citations should you want them, but they provide plenty of guidance for federal agencies on how to implement government-wide debarment suspension systems for any activities or programs that are non-procurement related. So a lot of legalese there, huh? Big words. Next slide, please. For your auditing requirements, we don't have any updated information here. It's the same auditing requirements that have always been around for federal grants, or at least since 2012. So for those of you who have contracted with HCD in the past several years, these are the standard auditing and record-keeping requirements. And you just have to make sure to follow the general accepted accounting principles, GAAP, as outlined in 2 CFR 200-500. Next slide, please. And for your conflicts of interest, contractors must enforce standards of it, for conflicts of interest, which govern the performance of their officers, employees, or agents engaged in the award and administration of state ESG funds. These standards are once again defined in federal regulation. You can find them at 24 CFR. And once again, we can put these in the chat if you would like them there. That's what HCD will use as the criteria for the standards as they're set forth in the federal regulation and any applicable California conflict of interest rules in evaluating questions concerning potential conflicts of interests. Next slide, please. Sanctions. If a contractor or service provider fails to adhere to state and federal laws and regulations related to ESG and these guidelines, HCD may impose sanctions as well as any other remedies available to it under the law or these guidelines on a contractor for failure to abide by any state or federal laws, regulations, and these guidelines. As the department deems necessary or appropriate, sanctions may include, but are not limited to, any of the following. We can condition future ESG grants on compliance or non-compliance. We can direct a contractor to stop incurring cost under a current contract, requiring all or part of the ESG grant to be remitted or barring a contractor from applying for future HCD funding. Next slide, please. False, fictitious, or fraudulent claims. Try and say that 3 times fast. When applying for funds, any person who knowingly makes a false claim or statement to HUD or to HCD may be subject to civil or criminal penalties under federal law. There is a HUD hotline that you can call. It is on this slide. And there is an email or a 1-800 number, and the Office of the Inspector General will investigate any claims of fraud or mismanagement. Next slide, please. In the event of a breach by the contractor of any of the provisions of the ESG standard agreement, the contractor will receive written notice from HCD to cure the breach or violation within a period of not less than 14 days. And if the contractor does not cure the breach to the satisfaction of HCD within the specified time, HCD at its option may declare a default under the standard agreement and may seek legal remedies. Next slide, please. And most of you are familiar with Housing First practices. Housing First centers on providing or connecting homeless people to permanent housing as quickly as possible. In addition, Housing First providers offer services as needed and do not make housing contingent on participation in services. And Housing First priorities are very important to HCD, and they are an established priority for both HUD and HCD. So all ESG assisted projects shall operate in compliance with Housing First practices, including but not limited to the bullet points on the screen. So ensuring low barrier, easily accessible assistance to all people, to help identify and resolve barriers to obtaining and maintaining housing, quickly resolving a participant's housing crisis before focusing on non-housing related services, and finally connecting participants to appropriate support services that foster long-term housing stability. So the takeaway for this slide is that Housing First practices are a priority. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of a wrap-up slide, other federal and state requirements. It's a general terminology on all federal contracts and most of the California state contracts that the contractors and service providers shall abide by all applicable local, state, and federal laws pertaining to the ESG program, including these guidelines. There is a Federal Whistleblower Protection Act that protects employees from retaliation for making protected disclosures. It also provides penalties for supervisors who retaliate against whistleblowers. California has the same protection. It authorizes the state auditor to receive complaints from state employees and members of the public who wish to report on improper governmental activities. And with that, the standard boilerplate language section of this presentation is over. And I will turn it over to Tuesday, who will be going over the appeals process. Tuesday, take it away.
Thank you, Anthony. Next slide. HCD will provide the opportunity for appeals for any grant application denied. The appeals process will be discussed in detail in each NOFA or Notice of Funding and will follow all federal regulations and state ESG guidelines. Appeals decisions will be final and binding. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tuesday. And now we are moving to the Q&A section of the presentation. So that was a lot of information. If you want to take a moment to get a drink of water, stretch out, go right ahead. We do have quite a few questions and we're going to address them, I believe, one by one at a time. And we'll wait for Amanda to pop in here and she will go ahead and lead this part of the discussion.
Hi there. I'm trying to get my screen back up. Thank you. Okay, so we have quite a few questions, some of which I've answered in the Q&A box, or I've tried to answer some of them in the chat. There were a lot of questions about receiving the guidelines training and slides, and as Anthony mentioned earlier, we should get these out within 2 weeks or a month. With the holidays in between, it might take up to 3 weeks or a month to get this out and posted on our website. So the first question we have in the Q&A box is regarding discrimination. Discrimination on the basis of citizenship, does that mean that ESG funds can be used to serve undocumented people? Wondering if there's a conflict with the federal regs. We would like to collect and review our answer before we answer this, so we will get back to you if you could send us your email address, and then we will also discuss it in the next office hours.
Thank you, Amanda.
The next question, what is the difference between this ESG NOFA and other subrecipient ESG opportunities through territories like cities? So HCD gets the funding through HUD directly for non-entitlement areas. If your city has an ESG application process also, that is for entitlement cities and counties. So that would be the difference. We try to focus on non-entitlement entities that are not getting HUD funds directly for ESG. The next question from Ben is the threshold requirement for site control for emergency shelter new in the ESG guidelines? And the answer would be no. We have been asking for site control, as far as I know, for many, many, many years.
That's correct.
Yeah. Next question, are tribal governments eligible for funding? It appears that the language for IRS compliance and local units of government approval is contrary to tribal governments. Unfortunately, right now, we are not able to fund tribal entities. We are hoping in the future that the ESG regulations are modified so that we can fund tribal entities. We did do that for ESG CV, but we were given a waiver to do so. And like I said, unfortunately, we cannot do that as of now for the annual ESG program. Next question, finding available units that meet FMR requirements continues to be a challenge. Oh, sorry, it's moving. I think other people are asking questions. I lost it. Okay. Finding available units that meet FMR requirements continues to be a challenge for rapid rehousing providers. Are there any updates regarding requesting an FMR waiver from HUD to allow for greater flexibility with FMR requirements in rapid rehousing programs? And Felicity, correct me if I'm wrong, I do not believe we have heard back from HUD on this yet.
That's correct, Amanda. We submitted a waiver request to HUD, but we have not yet received a response. They have told us they've received it and it's under review.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I have a question about eligible activities. Shelter resources are very limited where I work. One is being rebuilt and expanded, but will not be completed until 2026. Is there a possibility that a hotel voucher program that we currently have for winter service project could be expanded for year-round services and eligible project under this funding? If there is no emergency shelter available in the area, you can submit kind of like a waiver for that. And yes, you can provide vouchers if there is no shelter available in your area. But you would have to describe that in your application. Next question, can any local city government, including charter, apply for this funding? Is there a certain minimum population requirement? Can any city apply for the match exemption competition? So any city or local government can apply for the funding, but you have to either be the COC or part of the COC. So just someone off the street can't apply for it. They have to be part of the COC. And then as far as the match exemption, yes, if you meet the requirements to apply, you can apply for the match exemption. Everyone is able to do that. Next question, has the risk assessment tool been developed? If so, can we receive a copy? I do not see it in the guidelines. I do not believe we have created the tool based on the new guidelines as of yet. And we would have to talk to management if we will be submitting or sending that out to subrecipients.
And
So
I just
we
want
would,
to clarify, the risk assessment, is that related to monitoring or is that related?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
The HUD risk assessment, federal risk assessment is what we have used in the past.
Okay, thank you, Anthony.
And that is available. We can send that out.
Okay, so if you could either put in your email address or send us an email through the NOFA inbox, we can send that back to you. Thank you, Anthony.
Mhm.
Next question. I recently heard that Housing First was going away at the state level for HAP and other funds. Is that true? I do not believe that is true for ESG funding, but Felicity, if you know otherwise, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I've heard nothing of that sort. My understanding is Housing First will still be in place for ESG funds.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Have there been any changes on how many organizations can apply for balance of state funds within a single region? So we are no longer doing the balance of state anymore. So if the COC decides to allow organizations to apply on their behalf, they are allowed to recommend up to 2 organizations. So that would be up to your COC if they are not applying themselves. And then like being the pass through to allow for subrecipients apply to them. So it's up to your COC on how that's going to work. Another question, any updates on the updated VAWA regulations?
I can speak to that one at least a
Okay.
little bit.
Thank you, Tuesday.
This question was asked in the last office hours, and I've been researching it. I haven't found anything that changed what documentation is required. We did have a change in how the federal government was defining folks that are qualified under VAWA. I'm still doing some research to see if there are some changes that we need to bring down into the state level, and I wasn't able to get together a slide for this particular office hours at this time. So in answer to the question from last office hours is right now, I do not see any evidence that we need to change our paperwork, but we did have a change of definition for who falls under VAWA. The one thing to keep in mind with VAWA is that the VAWA requirements that we have from federal requirements is for every one of your ESG clients or participants. So you need to have with all rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention, you do need to have your VAWA paperwork in order, but there isn't any change in that documentation right now.
Thank you, Tuesday. What would be an example of disposal for real or personal property? And is there a threshold for need to report the disposal? What would be an example of something that might be disposed that would be reported? So any equipment would meet this requirement. So it could be a computer, a printer, it could be a vehicle. And we have added a tab in the RFF to report real or personal property. So for 2024 and moving forward, it would be anything that would be $10,000 or more would need to be reported on the RFF. So if you buy 20 computers and they end up being $11,000, you would have to put that on the RFF. And then if they are disposed of, you would need to email us. We would have to go through like how much they're worth at that time and whether or not we would require a check back for that property. Next question, what proof of American made can be shown? What is the documentation expectation? That is a great question, Chuck. We are still trying to maneuver through this with HUD. HUD has not put out a lot of guidance yet, but we are hoping to get more guidance on this. Felicity, if you want to add anything.
Sure, I can. Hi, Chuck. This is Felicity. We're working on this for the community development block grant in particular because there's a lot more purchase of materials. Again, to repeat what Tuesday said, we do encourage ESG grantees to find other sources to do any kind of repair that requires the purchase of of physical materials or the use of physical tools, because it's complicated for these small amounts of money. However, if you did make a choice that you wanted to use to do a physical repair, it is anticipated that the kind of documentation that you would need would be photos with a stamp that show the stamp that says that the product is made in the USA, or a receipt that shows that the product is USA made, or a certification from the vendor. We have some of these examples that are produced and are on our website for CDBG, but we have not yet produced those materials for ESG, but we anticipate having as much alignment as possible. But the guidance from HUD does also vary by program. So not 100% known yet, but I hope that that's helpful in terms of some examples of what documentation might look like.
Okay, next question. Are there any exceptions to recipients requiring a single audit? If not, will a single audit be necessary prior to submission of application? So from 2024 moving forward, a single audit is required if you receive more than $1 million in federal funds. So 2024 and backwards, the audit requirement was $750,000 or more in federal funds, but since 2 CFR has been updated, 2024 and going forward will be $1 million or more in federal funds. Next question, are tribally designated housing entities eligible to receive ESG non-entitlement funds? Can tribal governments or tribal designated housing entities be ESG subcontractors? Unfortunately, right now, tribal entities are not allowed to receive ESG annual funding. Like I mentioned before, we did have it for ESG CV, but they have to be a part of the COC. Currently, I know of one that is trying to become a COC, but I do not believe that they have gotten there yet. Next question, must the required policies and procedures and written standards compliant with ESG Fed and state guidelines be board approved by an agency's board of directors? Yes, you do have to have policies and procedures and written standards in place in order to apply for ESG funds, and they should be board approved by your board of directors. But I will say on our end, Tuesday has been reviewing all of the policies and procedures that have been coming in currently. So those are required. One more clarification. If we are part of the local COC, would we apply for the funding through them or directly to the state? Or would the COC have to apply and then treat us as a subrecipient? So that would be a question for your COC. It can go either way. Like I mentioned, if the COC decides to apply directly, then you would need to go to them to apply for the funds. They would be the pass-through entity. If they decide to not apply for the funding, then they can have up to 2 entities apply directly to the state, but that is up to them. Next question, do you know what the AMI restrictions are? Would anyone like to take a stab at answering that?
Is it, we're talking about the area
Area
median
median
income?
income. They believe they're listed on HUD's
I just put the link in the chat.
Okay,
HUD's
thank you.
ESG income
Thank you,
limits.
Anthony.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And those haven't changed, and they were updated in June of 2024. It's all on that link I just put in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. Next question. So correct me if I'm wrong, with these new guidelines, jurisdictions who receive federal ESG would now be eligible. So like I mentioned earlier, we fund non-entitlement areas, and we try to help people within those non-entitlement areas. And when the NOFA is posted, you will see the eligible COC areas that can apply. Does anyone else want to add on to that?
No, I think you covered it, but just to ensure, there's a couple ways to take the question, but it really comes down to, are you a entitlement area or are you a non-entitlement area? If you're non-entitlement, of course, but I don't think these guidelines have had any effect on entitlement areas at all.
No.
And there's only a few of them: San Francisco, Long Beach. I think there's only like 4 or 5 of them statewide.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Anthony. So next question. So correct, oh, that's the last one, sorry. Is there 2 per category? So the question is regarding if a COC does not apply. So it's 2, if a COC does not apply, they can have 2 entities in whole. So it would be 2 emergency shelters, 2 rapid rehousing programs, or 1 of each. It's up to the COC what is most needed for your area. Is an SF 425 federal financial report required at grant closeout? I am not sure what that is.
Well, we have the grant closeout process that we go through for HCD's ESG administration. The federal financial report, well, I'm not completely familiar with, but I believe that would be something that a grantee who has federal funds would be reporting directly to the federal government. But I have no knowledge of it going through.
You got it right,
system.
Anthony. It's for our sub grantees, they do not need to file an SF 424 for the funds that they receive from us. HCD files that with HUD.
Yep. Thank you, Felicity.
Okay, thank you both. Next question. Earlier you mentioned how you're trying to focus on non-entitlement cities for this cycle's funding. Does this mean that entitlement cities should not apply? So like I mentioned earlier, it will be listed in the NOFA which COC areas can apply, but we do focus, so some entitlement areas are funded with our program, but we focus on the non-entitlement cities and counties within that COC area. So you are able to apply, but please make sure you refer to the NOFA once it is released. Next question, we will need to complete SOI moving forward like we did every other year before now with new guidelines. Anthony, do you know the answer to that? Or Chelsea?
Well, are you talking about statement of information filing? That's just the question. There's a standard California statement of information filing, but that should not, we haven't highlighted that in the guidelines as changing any of the requirements. Some of these requirements, folks, also that I've noticed a trend in these questions is there are the ESG program requirements. Remember I mentioned at the beginning, there's the federal, and then there's that, which supersede. Then there's the state, our guidelines that we have, but there are also multiple regulatory items that are required for the state of California and the federal government that are outside our purview. We just stay within the ESG and the HCD. So I don't see any change on this question in terms of the statement of information filing. I hope that was clear.
Whoever asked that question, if you didn't get the answer, please feel free to unmute yourself and you can clarify. Next question, can you share the link to the updated ESG guidelines? The link shared in the email is not working. Gio, would you mind, or Anthony, would you, one of you mind posting that in the chat, please?
It's there.
Thank you. AMI restrictions have been difficult to implement and get funding spent. Has there been any talk about the AMI and getting any revisions? Not that I have heard of. Chelsea or Felicity, have you heard of any changes to AMI?
No, unfortunately, no.
No. Under previous regulations, COCs could recommend up to 3 applications, 2 rapid rehousing non-competitive fund and 1 competitive. Will all applications now be competitive? So as I've mentioned, if the COC does not apply directly for the funding, then they can recommend up to 2 organizations. The funds are now not competitive, all of them. There's no competitive and non-competitive. So the COC can recommend up to 2. You will not be competing against one another. We will most likely go with the 2 recommended entities that the COC allows to apply. Okay.
Amanda, I just wanted to respond to the comment that was in the, it's moved to answered, I think, but it was Chuck's comment that the BABA requirements will increase the cost of, he said, of equipment. And I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that the BABA regulation only applies to repairs and construction. It does not apply to equipment purchases like computers or bunk beds or other things that are not installed. It's just like a purchase of, and it wouldn't apply to vehicles, those kinds of things. It only applies to construction or repair activities. So just wanted to make sure that that was clarified.
Thank you. Oh, the person that talked about SOI earlier was talking about the solicitation of interest. Anthony.
Yeah, and once again, it just depends on the question. I probably need a little more context. Are you talking about as a COC establishing your having that requirement met? Excuse me, or was it something else? That's we would need a little more clarity on the question.
Again, feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you would like.
Yeah, I'm unable to allow that person. It's an anonymous attendee, so I'm unable to allow them to.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. So you are welcome to email the NOFA inbox with your question if we didn't answer you correctly or you need clarification. So the last question as of right now is if the COC applies for the funds, is there a limit on how many entities they can distribute the money to? Will there be a limit on how much funding the COC can receive? So the answer to the first question, we are not limiting. So if the COC applies directly, we are not limiting the number of entities that they can distribute the money to. So we are highly encouraging that COCs go that route so that you can fund as many as you would like. And then will there be a limit on how much funding the COC can receive? And the answer to that is yes, and that will be listed in the NOFA. There will be a allocation for each COC. And again, there's no competitive and non-competitive. So whatever is listed in the NOFA is how much the COC will get.
And Amanda, I want to jump in real quick. There was a question in the chat about the link that I sent not working properly. I just put the link to the ESG webpage in the chat. Should be able to access that. If you just scroll down just maybe a quarter of the page, you will see a link to the program final guidelines, December 10, 2024 PDF. You can click on that. And it looks like a question popped up in the chat as well. ESG used to have a thank you, Ben. ESG used to have a solicitation of interest process. I think that's what the anonymous person might be asking about.
So I don't believe we're going to have that anymore. So we will be requiring in the application for COCs that do not directly apply, we will have a certification that will need to be on the COC letterhead, verifying that in fact your agency was selected to apply. So that will be the only requirement. So any nonprofit or agency that is applying for the COC will need to get that certification from the COC.
Okay, sounds great. I think that's it for questions right now. But we want to stress that, you know, what is today, the 18th? The NOFA is going to come out on the 31st, so a couple of weeks, a couple of weeks. And then the portal is not going to open then for another month. So we've got a good month and a half, 6 to 8 weeks to go over the guidelines with you. If you have questions, you can send them to the NOFA inbox. We're going to have when we return on the 8th and the 15th, we're going to be going over the NOFA in detail with the resolutions and also the actual NOFA itself. So we'll still have plenty of time. You guys don't have to grasp it all today, but if you do have questions, let us know. We will cover them. And, we want to make sure you guys understand and that the process is easier, smoother, and we can get that money to you and out deployed in the community. So with that, we'll move back to these. Go ahead.
Sorry, Anthony, someone's still having an issue with getting to the guidelines. If you want to send us your email, Stephanie, or email the NOFA inbox, we can send you a copy of the guidelines since you're having an issue opening them. I was just able to open them, so I'm not really sure what's going on, but we're happy to send them to you if you email us or give us your email address. And then I noticed, Nicole, you changed your name to not anonymous. So I don't know if we answered your question or not. Chelsea, if you're able to unmute Nicole just to confirm that we answered your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Ben answered that. Sorry, I don't know why my thing said anonymous. I must have clicked it or something, but yes, it was previous. There was a solicitation of interest process every other year when we applied for the application, from my understanding. And so I just wanted to see if that was still going to continue moving forward.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anthony, you can take it on again.
Okay, fantastic. Just jump on in if something comes up. We want to make sure we get to these, and we're still under the time limit, so we're doing great. So everyone, that was the overview. And as I mentioned about the schedule and the timing, we still have a little bit of time to go through these with you and to provide some more training and TA. We would be happy to. The ESG guideline resources, the slide in front of you, I dropped that link in the chat, the Emergency Solutions Grant Program page. It's a wealth of information. And if you go under the resource, if you go down to the tabs and look at the resources, the archives, You'll find examples of the NOFAs. You'll find examples of the process. We have a YouTube channel that you can go and actually watch these office hour trainings from the last 2 years, I believe. And we cover every subject that we went through pretty much today at one point or another. So, we also have our team contact page that we keep mentioning, ESG NOFA at hcd.cal.gov, monitored during normal business hours, Monday through Friday. You can always send a message there. Next slide, please. And we've got our standard wrap-up slides now. We have our links to the Facebook, Twitter, or X, and LinkedIn. You can always follow us there. And our final slide always ends in a pitch. Next slide, please. That if you want to join Team HCD, we're always looking for new people to help us achieve our mission. And so we have good links there for the jobs that are currently available. And we're always here to answer questions for you. Thank you so much. That wraps up today's office hour session. Thank you all so much for attending. We will get these slides out to you sometime within the next 2 to 4 weeks. And office hours will resume again on the 8th of January. I keep looking that way because that's where my calendar is. And we look forward to seeing you then. We hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season. And that is it. Thank you so much. Take care.